What if I told you that on a cold February morning in 1981, 6.8 million Americans turned on their televisions, expecting to watch a routine celebrity interview, but instead witnessed the most emotionally devastating 23 minutes in television history? The host had planned to publicly humiliate Muhammad Ali live on national television. What happened instead was so unexpected, so profoundly human, that grown men wept in their living rooms, and the footage became the most requested tape in network archives for decades. February 19th, 1981, Studio 8 at CBS Television City in Los Angeles. Morning Talk America was broadcasting live to the East Coast at 9 a.m., 6 a.m. Pacific. The show's host, Jack Morrison, had built his reputation over 12 years by asking the questions other interviewers were too polite to ask. His signature style was the friendly setup, followed by the devastating reveal that left celebrities squirming in their chairs while America watched. But today's guest was different. Today, Morrison planned to do something that would either make his career legendary or destroy it completely. He was going to expose Muhammad Ali as a broken, confused shell of his former self, live on national television. Ali sat in the green room, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. At 39, the signs of what doctors suspected might be Parkinson's disease were becoming impossible to hide. His speech had slowed to a careful drawl. His legendary quick wit now required extra moments to surface. The boxing world whispered that the greatest was fading before their eyes. Morrison's assistant had promised Ali's representatives this would be a respectful interview about his charitable foundation work and thoughts on current boxing. What they didn't know was that Morrison had spent 3 weeks preparing an entirely different ambush. "Mr. Ali, we're going live in 2 minutes," the floor manager announced. Ali nodded, his movements deliberate and careful. Something felt wrong about today. The crew avoided eye contact. The usual pre-show warmth was missing. Even the makeup artist had seemed nervous while working on him. In the control room, Morrison reviewed his attack plan one final time. His producers had researched every controversial statement Ali had ever made, every financial problem, every sign of his declining health. They called it Operation Knockout, a systematic demolition designed to boost ratings and establish Morrison as television's most fearless interviewer. The strategy was brutal, but simple. Start with gentle questions to relax Ali, then gradually expose his diminished mental capacity. Force him to confront embarrassing moments from his past. Make him admit that the man who once claimed to be the greatest was now just another washed-up athlete, desperately clinging to faded glory. "We're live in 30 seconds, came the call. Morrison walked onto the set, his famous smile perfectly calibrated for camera 2. The studio audience of 200 people applauded as he settled behind his desk. Across from him sat the chair that would soon hold the man. Morrison planned to destroy on live television, but Morrison had made one critical miscalculation. He'd forgotten that Muhammad Ali had spent 20 years facing opponents who wanted to hurt him, and Ali had never been defeated by giving up. "Good morning, America, and welcome to Morning Talk America," Morrison began, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm your host, Jack Morrison, and today we have a very special guest joining us. A man who needs no introduction but who frankly may need some explaining. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 3-time heavyweight boxing champion of the world, Muhammad Ali." The audience erupted as Ali walked onto the set. His movements were slower than they once were, but his presence still commanded attention. He waved to the crowd with genuine warmth, his famous smile intact despite everything he'd endured. He settled into the guest chair, his hands folded carefully in his lap. "Muhammad, it's an honor to have you here," Morrison said, his tone perfectly friendly. "Thank you for having me, Jack," Ali replied, his words measured and deliberate. Morrison began exactly as planned. Gentle questions about Ali's charitable work with children, his thoughts on current heavyweight contenders, his memories of his greatest fights. Ali's answers came slowly but thoughtfully, and the studio audience seemed genuinely moved by his obvious struggle with his condition. But those watching closely could see Morrison's expression shifting, his body language becoming more predatory. The trap was about to spring. "Mohammed," Morrison said, leaning forward slightly. "I want to ask you about something I think our viewers are concerned about. There's been a lot of speculation about your health lately. Your speech has changed dramatically. Your hands shake. Some people are saying you stayed in boxing too long, that maybe the Muhammad Ali we're seeing now is just a shadow of the man who once claimed to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the respectful interview they'd expected. Ali was quiet for several seconds, an eternity in television time. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Jack, can I ask you something?" The question caught Morrison completely off guard. This wasn't in his prepared attack script. "Of course, Mohammed. What makes you so angry?" Morrison forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow through the studio speakers. "I'm not angry, Mohammed. I'm just asking the direct questions that our viewers deserve to have answered." Ali studied Morrison's face with the same intensity he'd once used to read opponents in the ring. "You seem like a man carrying a lot of pain. Not just today. I can see it in your eyes. Something's eating at you from the inside. What is it?" The control room erupted in confusion. Morrison's producers were speaking frantically into his earpiece, telling him to get back to the prepared questions, to regain control of the interview. But Morrison found himself strangely paralyzed by Ali's gentle gaze. "Mohammed, I think you're confused," Morrison said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "We're here to talk about you, not me." "Are we?" Ali asked. "Because it feels like you brought me here to hurt me. And I'm wondering why a successful man like you would want to hurt an old boxer who never did anything to him." Morrison's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "Look, Mohammed, I'm just doing my job. I ask tough questions. That's what I do." "No," Ali said quietly. "That's what you hide behind. But what I want to know is what you're hiding from." The audience was completely silent now. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath. Morrison's attack plan was crumbling, but something else was happening, something he hadn't prepared for. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Jack?" Ali continued. "I see a man who's afraid. Not of me, but of something much deeper. You're trying so hard to tear me down that you're forgetting to build yourself up." Morrison's hands began to tremble. Not with disease, but with emotion he'd kept buried for years. "This is ridiculous. We're supposed to be talking about your problems, not analyzing me like some psychiatrist." "But that's the thing," Ali said, his voice growing stronger despite his physical limitations. "You think my problems make me weak? But they've made me stronger. They've taught me to see people's pain, even when they're trying to hurt me. Especially then." "What are you talking about?" Morrison asked. But his voice was cracking now. "You're angry at me because I represent something you wish you could be," Ali said. "I stood up for what I believed in, even when it cost me everything. I lost my title, my money, my prime years, but I never lost myself. And that terrifies you because you've spent your whole career tearing people down instead of building anything meaningful." Tears began forming in Morrison's eyes. The cameras captured every moment as the most powerful interviewer on television started to break down on his own show. That's not true," Morrison whispered. "When did you stop believing in anything, Jack?" Ali asked gently. "When did you decide that destroying people was easier than creating something beautiful?" Morrison tried to speak, but no words came. The man who had built his career on making others uncomfortable was now completely vulnerable in front of 6.8 million viewers. "I used to want to be a teacher," Morrison finally said, his voice barely audible. "I wanted to help kids learn, but my father said that was foolish, said I needed to be tougher, more aggressive. So I became this person who hurts people for entertainment." Ali nodded with understanding. "And now you're successful, but you hate what you've become." "Yes," Morrison said, tears streaming down his face now. "I hate what I do. I hate what I've become. I hate that I brought you here to humiliate you when you're already struggling with something I can't even imagine." The studio was absolutely silent. Camera operators who had seen thousands of interviews were crying behind their equipment. The control room staff watched in amazement as television history unfolded. "Jack," Ali said, reaching across the space between their chairs to place his trembling hand on Morrison's shoulder. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be." Morrison looked up at Ali through his tears. "How can you forgive me? How can you show kindness to someone who was trying to destroy you?" Ali smiled. Not his famous showboat grin, but something deeper and more genuine. "Because hurt people, and healed people. I learned a long time ago that the strongest thing you can do is love someone who's trying to hurt you." Morrison completely broke down then, sobbing openly on live television. "I'm so sorry, Mohammed. I'm so sorry for what I planned to do to you. You're dealing with something so difficult, and I wanted to make it worse for ratings. I forgive you," Ali said simply. "And more importantly, you need to forgive yourself." The interview continued for another 10 minutes. But it wasn't really an interview anymore. It was a conversation between two human beings, one teaching the other that strength comes not from tearing others down, but from lifting them up. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Morrison sat in stunned silence. His entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt in 23 minutes. "What do I do now?" he asked Ali. "You become the person you were meant to be," Ali replied, standing slowly from his chair. "You start tomorrow." Morrison looked out at his audience, many of whom were still wiping tears from their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you all an apology. I brought Muhammad Ali here today under false pretenses. I planned to ambush him, to mock his condition, to tear down a man who's already fighting the hardest battle of his life." He paused, gathering himself. "Instead, he taught me what it really means to be great. It's not about never falling down. It's about how you treat people when you have the power to hurt them." Morrison turned to Ali, who was preparing to leave the set. "Muhammad, you said I could become who I was meant to be. What if I don't know who that is anymore?" Ali stopped and smiled. "Then you get to find out. That's the most exciting adventure of all." The show ended with an image that would be replayed millions of times. Muhammad Ali, his hands shaking from disease, embracing a television host who had learned that true strength comes from gentleness, and that the greatest victory is helping someone discover their better self. Morrison never did another ambush interview. The footage of that February morning became legendary, studied in journalism schools as an example of how authentic human connection could transform both interviewer and audience. But for the 6.8 million people who witnessed it live, it was simply 23 minutes when they watched a sick man teach a healthy man what it truly means to be whole.